When heaven calls and man runs away, then the sea awakens. The crushing depths swallow everything, and the absolute darkness finally reveals the hidden truth. 3 days, 3 nights. Broken, man rises once again. 100,000 souls, one message, 40 days. And when mercy descends in place of judgment, then it is understood. But God's love is not confined by boundaries. Some journeys begin from the depths. Hills of Israel at dusk. The olive trees were gently swaying in the breeze. In the distance, the voices of shepherds echoed, and in that tranquil atmosphere, Jonah stood alone. His eyes were lifted toward the sky, but there was no peace on his face. Instead, within him, there was a shadow of struggle. Unconsciously, his fingers were curling into a fist. Tiny beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. And then that voice came, not a roar, not a stormy call, but a deep, steady voice that reached down to the soul, a voice that seemed to hold the air still and pause time for a few moments. Jonah, arise and go to Nineveh, warn the people there. Jonah's breath seemed to stop, and images of that great city flashed through his mind like lightning, towering walls, stern soldiers, merciless streets. And that empire, which had crushed countless commands without mercy. And in that very moment, a battle began within him. Because he knew that if he went, if he delivered the message, then perhaps they would change. And if they changed, God would forgive them. And this very thought blazed in his heart like fire. For within him burned the flames of judgment, while in God's heart there was an endless ocean of compassion, a gentle voice on his lips, left unspoken. And then, a little more forcefully, never again. He turned and started walking down from the hills. At first with brisk steps, then almost running through the village, through the market lanes, where people looked at him in surprise, wondering where this prophet was rushing off to in such haste. But no one could stop him, because now only one decision was written in his eyes. After traveling for miles, he reached the port of Jaffa, where the vast sea stretched out into the distance, and the waves crashed against the shore. There was a mixed scent of salt and wood in the air. Sailors were pulling ropes, furling sails, and Jonah's eyes settled on a large wooden ship that was headed for the distant land of Tarshish. He asked the captain about the route and the fare. And without hesitation, he took out all the coins from his pouch and placed them in the captain's hand, as if he was giving away the burden of his entire life in that one transaction. As soon as he boarded the ship, clouds slowly began to gather in the sky, the sun started to slip towards the horizon, and a faint restlessness appeared on the surface of the sea. But Jonah was not seeing any of this. He went down to the lower part of the ship. There it was dark, damp, and the old smell of wood lingered against the walls. He sat down in a corner, buried his head in his hands, and whispered to himself that he could not go, that those people were his enemies, that their hands were stained with the blood of his country, and that if God forgave them, he would not be able to bear it. And in that turmoil, his eyes began to grow heavy. The rhythm of the ship began to lull him, and he fell asleep. Up on deck, the ropes were untied, the sails were hoisted, and the ship slowly began to move away from the shore. In the beginning, everything was calm. The waves were gentle. The sailors, laughing and talking, were busy with their work, and it was as if the sea itself was smiling. But far off on the horizon, a thin line of dark clouds began to appear, which spread rapidly within minutes. Suddenly, the wind changed direction. The first cold gust came, then another, and in no time, black curtains were drawn across the sky. The first big wave shook the ship violently. Then another wave hit, and the color drained from the sailors' faces. Someone looked up and said that a storm was coming. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the sea, which had been calm just a while ago, now began to toss up waves as high as mountains. Water started flooding the deck. The ropes began to creak. Everyone started running to their positions. Some were tightening the sails, some were throwing water overboard, and some were raising their hands to the sky in prayer. The storm was now fully awake. The wind was whistling as it crashed against the ship. Rain was falling like arrows, and every wave of the sea seemed to ask who was here, fleeing from the command of heaven. The deck was now completely flooded. The wooden walls were groaning, the mast was trembling, and the fear in the sailors' eyes was clearly visible, fear that could not be put into words. The captain stood above, his beard soaked through. His clothes clung to his body, and he was shouting with all his might, "Lower the rope, drop the sail, throw the water out." But his voice was drowned out by the roar of the storm. Every man was trying to save his own life. Someone was handling the oars, someone else was lifting heavy cargo and throwing it into the sea. Bags of spices, clothes, wooden chests, everything was being tossed to the waves to lighten the ship. Yet each new wave rose higher than the last and tossed the ship about like a toy. Someone said in a trembling voice to call upon their own gods. And in no time, every sailor began to pray according to his own faith. Some fell to their knees, some raised their hands to the sky and began to weep, while others looked toward the sea and made vows. But the sky remained silent, and the sea grew even more furious. Meanwhile, the captain's eyes fell on the stairs below. "Where is the passenger?" No answer. "Found him." The captain staggered down. The lower part was half filled with water, and in that dark corner, leaning against the wooden wall, Jonah was still lying there. Shaking him, the captain shouted, "Get up! We are dying! Call upon your God! Perhaps he will have mercy on us." And Jonah's eyes opened. The thunder rumbling from above and the screams of the people began to sink into him, as if every sound was reminding him how far he had run away. When Jonah reached the deck, he saw the storm for the first time. He witnessed its full horror. The sky was completely black. Lightning was flashing again and again. And with every flash, the sailors' faces turned white for a moment, then disappeared into the darkness. Jonah's heart grew heavy, because now he could clearly feel that all of this was happening because of him. The captain gathered everyone together. Water was streaming down their faces, and their voices were trembling. He said that this is no ordinary storm. Surely this calamity has come upon us because of someone among us. Then someone suggested that they cast lots to see who was to blame. Small stones were brought out. Each man picked one up, and in the rain, everyone opened their fists. One by one, white stones were revealed. And then it was Jonah's turn. He opened his palm, a black stone. For a moment, everything stopped, as if even the wind forgot to breathe. Then all eyes turned to Jonah. Questions broke out all at once. "Who are you? Where have you come from? What have you done?" Jonah took a deep breath. His voice was heavy. He said that he is a servant of the God of heaven, the very one who made the sea and the land, and that he is running away from him. As soon as they heard this, the sailors' faces turned even paler, because now they understood what kind of power they were standing before. The waves were crashing against the ship. Water had already filled up to their ankles. And the captain, his voice trembling, asked, "What should we do now, so that this storm may calm down?" Jonah looked toward the sea, then up at the sky, and softly said, "Pick me up and throw me into the water. Then this storm will subside." His words were heavier than the waves. At first, no one raised their hands. They did not want to shed innocent blood. They rowed with all their might, trying to turn the ship toward the shore. But the sea would not let them move forward. After every attempt, another huge wave would come and wash away all their efforts. At last, the captain bowed his head. He looked up at the sky and said, "O Lord, do not hold us guilty because of this man. We are not doing this of our own will." And then with trembling hands they grabbed Jonah. His clothes had become heavy with water. His hair was stuck to his face, and then they took him to the edge of the ship. Jonah looked at the dark sky one last time. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a moment, and a glimpse of regret appeared in his eyes. In a soft voice, he said, "Forgive me, Lord," and in the very next moment, his body was in the air. Then cold black water. As soon as he fell into the sea, the roaring wind began to subside, and the waves started to grow smaller. The rain slowed down, and within moments, that fierce, the sea suddenly became calm. The ship became steady. The sailors began to look around in disbelief. They had just witnessed a man disappear into the sea, and with him, the storm had vanished as well. A hush fell over the deck. Slowly, the sailors fell to their knees. Someone whispered, "This is the true God." With tears in his eyes, someone vowed that from now on he would worship only him, and the ship, which just moments ago was at death's door, was now floating on calm waters. But down in the dark depths, Jonah was sinking. His lungs were burning. All around him there was only water and silence, and he felt that this was the end, that his story would end here. But the story wasn't over yet, because somewhere in the darkness of the ocean depths, something huge was moving toward him. And this was the moment when the fleeing prophet was about to become the rescued prophet. Jonah had fallen into the sea. The cold water was closing in around him. The shadow of the ship above was slowly fading away, and below, utter darkness was spreading. There was the echo of water in his ears. His body had become heavy, and with every breath, it felt as if his lungs were filling with fire. He tried to move his arms and legs, but the waves had caught hold of him. He kept getting pulled further and further down, as if the sea itself was calling him into its depths. A faint light began to dance before his eyes. His head started spinning, and he felt that everything was over, that this was his end. He thought to himself, if only he had listened to the first voice, if only he hadn't run away, if only he had placed God's will above his own anger. But now, even the time for regret seemed to be slipping away from his grasp. All around him was a deep blue darkness. Seaweed began to wrap around his legs. The cold had seeped into his bones, and tiny fish passed by him like creatures from an unknown world. His body was exhausted. His eyes began to close, and just then, in that dense darkness beneath the water, there was a heavy commotion. Something very large was moving toward him. At first he thought it was his imagination, but then he felt the water around him stirring, as if some enormous creature had shifted its position. And in the very next moment, a huge shadow appeared before him, so massive that its boundaries could not be seen. And before he could understand anything, a gigantic mouth opened, the water rushed inward, and Jonah was swallowed up by the darkness. In a single moment, everything changed. Now there was no sea around him. Now there were walls all around, wet, soft, throbbing walls. There was a strange warm air, a heavy stench, and the darkness was so thick that he couldn't see his own hand. Jonah coughed loudly, spat out the water from his throat, and suddenly realized that he could breathe. The air was foul, it stank, but it was air. He was alive. Shivering, he sat up, his hands groping around him. On every side were fleshy walls, slowly rising and falling, as if some giant chest was breathing. Suddenly a wave of fear swept through him. He understood now. He was inside the belly of a giant fish. A broken sound escaped his lips. No, no. He struck the walls with his hands, trying to get out, but every direction was blocked. There was only darkness. And with the creature's slow heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. There was neither day nor night, only silence and the sound of his own breathing. First fear, then panic, and after that, slowly, exhaustion. He slid down and sat, hugging his knees to his chest, and for the first time, he was completely broken. Now there was no way out, no plan, no direction left to escape. And amidst that brokenness, something inside him began to change. His anger started to fade, his ego began to melt away, and in its place, a heavy sense of shame took over. Tears began to flow from his eyes, disappearing somewhere into the darkness. In a soft voice, he said, I ran, you called, and I ran. I considered my hatred greater than your will. He remembered the ship, the faces of the sailors, the captain's trembling voice, and then he realized, if God had wished, he could have died in the sea, but he brought him this far. In this strange darkness, where there is both fear and life, this was not punishment, it was mercy. Slowly, he lifted his head, looked toward the darkness, and for the first time, called out to God with all his heart. When I was in trouble, I called to you, and you heard me. His voice was trembling, but the words came from the heart. The waters surrounded me, the depths seized me, seaweed tangled around my head, I descended to the roots of the mountains. But you brought my life up from the pit. With every sentence, his burden grew lighter. With every word, the hardness within him was breaking. He kept sitting and praying, sometimes whispering, sometimes crying, sometimes with his eyes closed. And in that darkness, his soul slowly began to feel the light. Finally, from his lips came the words, salvation belongs to the Lord. He repeated this sentence again and again, salvation belongs to the Lord. And as soon as these words fully settled within him, there was a stir all around him. The fish's body began to move. The walls started moving rapidly up and down, and Jonah felt that he was rising upward. Somewhere far off in the darkness, a faint light began to glimmer. 3 days and 3 nights had passed. And now, from those same ocean depths, a new beginning was rising upward, because God had listened, and God was not about to end the story yet. The first light of morning was shimmering on the surface of the sea. The waves were gently touching the sand. There was a faint scent of salt in the air, and a deep silence had settled over the shore. Just then, something heavy stirred beneath the water, as if a massive body had shifted its position. And in the very next moment, a large fish moved toward the shallow water. Its body struck the shore, its mouth opened, and with a loud sound, Jonah was thrown out onto the sand. He lay there for several moments, coughing, spitting out water and bitterness. His clothes were sticky and torn. His body was trembling with exhaustion, but he was alive. He pressed his palms into the sand, bowed his head, and in a broken voice said, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." Behind him, in the sea, was the same fish. Slowly, it swam back toward the depths, as if returning after completing its task. Jonah sat there as the sun began to rise higher. Its heat was falling on his back. With every breath, life was returning to him. And in that peaceful moment, that voice came again. The same deep, steady voice, without any scolding, only concern. "Jonah, get up, go to Nineveh, and proclaim to them the message I give you." This time, Jonah did not hesitate. He rose from the sand and looked up at the sky. His eyes were moist, but there was a new resolve on his face. "Yes, Lord, I will go." And then he set out, walking through dry paths under the scorching sun, across fields, hills, and valleys. With every step, the old anger within him was left further behind, and a new obedience was being born. After many days of travel, the tall walls of Nineveh began to appear on the distant horizon. Massive gates, guards, towers, and the expanse within those walls. An entire world paused at the city gates with Jonah. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The streets were crowded with people. Merchants were selling their goods, children were playing, and soldiers were patrolling. No one had any idea that passing among them, this weary man had come bearing a message about their future. Jonah stood in the middle of the main road. He raised his voice, 40 days, just 40 days, and this city will be overturned." People stopped, some turned around, some laughed, and some just shrugged their shoulders. But Jonah kept walking. Street after street, at every crossroads, he kept repeating the same message. "Repent, for God's judgment is coming. 40 days and Nineveh will be destroyed." Slowly, the atmosphere began to change. A shopkeeper closed his shop. There was fear in his eyes. A soldier put down his sword. His face was filled with guilt. A mother hugged her child to her chest and began to cry quietly. The words began to spread like fire through dry grass. Everyone started talking about it. In every street, the same discussion. In every home, the same question. Are we really that bad? Is there still any way out for us? The news reached the palace. The king was sitting on his throne. The messenger delivered the message in a trembling voice, and the king's face turned pale. He summoned Jonah and, staring into his eyes, asked, "Who are you?" Jonah replied calmly, "I am a servant of God, and I bring you his message. In 40 days it will be destroyed. Your violence, your sins, all have been seen." The king was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, he stepped down from his throne. He removed his crown, took off his royal robes, and sat down in ashes. His voice echoed throughout the hall, "Make a proclamation. Every man, every woman, and every child in the city must fast. They must wear sackcloth, sit in ashes, and turn away from their evil ways. Perhaps God will have mercy on us and spare us." Things began to change. The markets were closed. People began to kneel and pray in the streets. Sounds of weeping could be heard from the houses. Even the animals were not given any fodder. Sackcloth and ashes everywhere, repentance everywhere. Jonah went outside the city to a small hill. He built a small shelter there and sat down to watch. There was a strange silence within him. He had witnessed things he had never imagined. The enemies bowing down, pride being broken, and hardened hearts melting. The days passed, 30 days, 35 days, and then the 40th. The sky was the same that day. The walls were still standing, the city was alive, nothing had happened. People were now slowly returning to their homes. But their faces had changed. As if after a deep storm. There was peace, and Jonah sat far away, watching all of this. He began to realize that God had forgiven them. His heart grew heavy because he had expected justice. But he saw mercy, and there he sat on that hill. Jonah began to realize how different God's ways are from those of humans. And this story was not yet finished, because the next chapter was about to be written within Jonah's own heart. Jonah was sitting on that small hill outside Nineveh. Dry earth stretched out all around him. Below, the vast city was breathing peacefully. A faint smoke was rising from the chimneys. People were slowly returning to their work in the streets, and the sky was as clear as it would be on any ordinary day. But inside Jonah, nothing was ordinary. The same question was still circling in his mind. Will nothing really happen? Has God truly forgiven them completely? He had built a small hut out of branches and leaves. Sitting there, he kept watching the city as if waiting for some final sign. The day wore on, the sun grew harsher, and the heat began to lash his back like a whip. His body was exhausted, his eyes were heavy, and a strange tension was rising in his heart. And then, as if someone had quietly done something in the darkness of night, a plant had grown near his hut. Morning, when Jonah woke up, he saw that a lush green plant was standing beside him. Its broad leaves were spreading out, creating dense shade, and the cool breeze was touching his face. And for the first time in many days, he breathed a sigh of relief. A faint smile appeared on his lips. Sitting in the shade, he said to himself, "This is good, very good." He sat there the whole day. Watching the city from the shade of the plant, his body felt at ease, and his mind was calm for a while, as if God had sent him a small gift. But the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, something had changed. A small insect had infested the roots of that plant, and the plant had withered. It did not rise again. He saw that the leaves had drooped, the green color had faded, and the shade had disappeared. At that very moment, a hot wind began to blow from the east. The sun rose quickly, and without any shade, his body began to burn once more. Sweat filled his eyes, his head grew heavy, and inside him, that same old anger welled up again. He sat down in exhaustion, then lay down, and in a broken voice said, "That's it, I've had enough. For me, dying is better than living." His voice faded into the wind, and just then, that same calm, steady voice returned. "Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about this plant?" Without looking up, Jonah replied, "Yes, absolutely, it is right. I am very upset." A moment of silence followed. Then God gently said, "You are upset about this plant, for which you did no work, which you did not cause to grow, which sprang up in one night and withered in one day." Jonah remained silent. Down in Nineveh, children were playing. People were repairing their homes, and the markets had started to open again. Life was returning. God's voice came again, and this time it was deeper. "And in Nineveh, there are more than 100,000 people who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals." There was a pause for a moment. "So should I not have compassion on that great city?" These words went straight to Jonah's heart. He sat there quietly. His eyes went first to the withered plant, then down to the living city below, a plant that came and went in a single day, and a city with thousands of families, children, elders, animals, dreams, and a future. Something inside him broke. He realized that he had grieved over a plant, but God grieved over people. He cried for his own comfort, but God cried for souls. Slowly, tears began to flow from his eyes. His head bowed, and for the first time, he truly understood that this story was not about justice. It was a story of love. It was not about revenge. It was a story of mercy. It was not the story of a prophet, but the story of God's heart. Down in the city, life went on. Thin trails of smoke were rising into the sky. Children's laughter echoed through the streets, and Jonah, sitting on the hill, now silently watched it all. There was no anger left within him now. There was only understanding and a quiet acceptance, because he had seen that God's love cannot be confined by boundaries. It is not limited to friends, it reaches even to enemies. It goes to every person who repents, who wants to return, who wants to change. Jonah remained sitting there. Until the sun slowly began to set, the sky turned golden, and evening descended upon Nineveh. And in that quiet moment, he said to himself, "Now I understand. The story ends here, but the message never ends, because God is still there today. Compassionate, merciful, slow to anger, and great in love. And even today, he still desires that no one should perish, but that everyone should have life."